Why are they rich and we are poor? Because our gold is in their vaults. Our uranium is in their reactors. Our money is in their banks. Today, we are changing the rules of the game. With the African Sahel Investment Bank, we are now the masters of our own resources. These forceful words reverberated through the Grand Hall in Ouagadougou as President Ibrahim Traoré announced the establishment of the Sahel Investment Bank. The audience, composed of financial experts, community leaders, and citizens from across Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, erupted in thunderous applause. This wasn't just the launch of another financial institution. It was a declaration of economic independence. The building that houses the Sahel Investment Bank stands in stark contrast to the towering glass skyscrapers of Western financial districts. It's a four-story structure blending modern architecture with traditional West African design elements, earth tones, geometric patterns, and a roof inspired by ancient Sahelian granaries. Yet, what happens inside this modest building represents one of the most revolutionary economic experiments in modern African history. For decades, the financial story of Africa has been one of dependency and extraction. The continent that provides the world with gold, diamonds, uranium, cobalt, and countless other resources remains paradoxically poor. This contradiction has a simple explanation. Africa's wealth flows outward, not inward. The mechanisms of this extraction are many. Unfair trade agreements, predatory loans, proud repatriation by foreign corporations, and a global financial system designed to serve northern interests. The statistics tell a damning story. According to research by a coalition of No-S's Africa, receives approximately $133.7 billion each year in loans, foreign investment, and development aid. But $192 billion leaves the continent in the same period through debt payments, repatriated profits, illicit financial flows, and other mechanisms. The result is a net annual loss of over $58 billion. In essence, subsidizes the wealth of the very nations that claim to be its benefactors. The Sahel Investment Bank represents a direct challenge to this system. Founded jointly by Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger in 2025, the bank operates on a revolutionary principle. The resources of Africans first, rather than exporting raw materials for processing elsewhere. These countries are leveraging their natural wealth as collateral for their own development. The idea came from a simple observation, explains Dr. Aminata Sanogo, the bank's newly appointed director. When we export a ton of unprocessed gold, we receive perhaps $50,000. When that same gold is processed, crafted, and sold as jewelry, or used in electronics, its value multiplies tenfold. Why should we always be on the losing end of this equation? Dr. Sano, Harvard-educated economist who left a prestigious position at the African Development Bank to lead this new institution, represents a growing trend of African professionals returning home to build their nations. She walks through the bank's main operations floor, where young financial analysts from across the Sahel region work at computer terminals, monitoring resource prices, managing investment portfolios, and analyzing development projects. The atmosphere is electric with purpose. Adama Ouedraogo, a 26-year-old financial analyst who previously worked at a French bank in Paris, explains his decision to return in France. I was just making money for shareholders. Here, every analysis I perform, every investment I recommend, directly impacts my country's future. This isn't just a job. It's a mission. The bank's founding capital of $500 million comes from an unprecedented arrangement. Rather than seeking foreign investors, the three founding countries allocated 5% of their annual resource exports to capitalize the institution. Gold from Burkina Faso, uranium from Niger, and cotton from Mali, resources that would typically be exported with minimal processing and return, now serve as the foundation for independent development. For too long, we've been told that we need foreign expertise, foreign capital, and foreign approval to develop, says Finance Minister Ibrahim Traoré of Mali. The Sahel Investment Bank turns this logic on its head. We have the resources, we have the expertise. What we lacked was the institutional framework to deploy them on our own terms. The grand opening ceremony in January 2025 was deliberately modest compared to typical bank launches. Instead of champagne and canapés for elite guests, the bank hosted a public celebration in Ouagadougou's Central Square. Thousands of citizens participated, many traveling hundreds of kilometers to witness what many described as a historic moment for African financial sovereignty. "I brought my children to see this," said Mariam Dio, a teacher from a village near Ouagadougou. "I want them to grow up knowing that our resources can build our future, not just enrich others." This bank belongs to them as much as to any government official or economist. The bank's operations fall into three main categories, each challenging. A different aspect of the financial colonialism that has constrained African development. The first is infrastructure financing. Traditionally, when African countries need to build railways, power plants, or water systems, they approach the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, or bilateral donors. These loans come with stringent conditions, often requiring privatization of public services, reduction in social spending, or preferential treatment for foreign companies. The Sahel Investment Bank offers an alternative, financing infrastructure projects without political conditions. The Bama Canal in Burkina Faso represents one of the bank's early successes. This irrigation project, bringing water to over 3,000 hectares of farmland, was completed in just 8 months with financing from the Sahel Investment Bank. Previous attempts to fund the project through international donors had stalled for years due to disagreements over conditions. When we approached traditional lenders, they wanted us to privatize water distribution and allow foreign companies to manage the canal, explains Musa Dio, the project's director. With financing from our own bank, we maintained public ownership and hired local contractors. The result, the project was completed under budget and ahead of schedule. The impact was immediate. In the first growing season after the canal's completion, agricultural output in the Bama region increased by 270%. Farmers, who previously struggled to grow enough food for their families, were now producing surpluses for local markets. A region that once depended on food aid became self-sufficient within a single agricultural cycle. Ibrahim Traoré, a farmer whose family has worked the land around Bama for generations, describes the transformation. "Before the canal, we lived at the mercy of the rain. One bad season meant hunger. Now we control our destiny. My children eat well, attend school, and have a future here. This is what development should mean." The second area of operations is value addition financing. For centuries, Africa has exported raw materials only to import finished products at much higher prices. The bank is working to break this cycle by providing capital for processing facilities that allow these countries to capture more of the value chain. In Bobo-Dioulasso, Burkina Faso's second-largest city, a new cotton processing plant funded by the bank has transformed the local economy. Instead of exporting raw cotton, the facility produces yarn and fabric, employing 800 workers and increasing the export value by 300%. "Before this factory, I sold my cotton for whatever price the foreign buyers offered," says Salifo Idriogo, a cotton farmer from a nearby village. "Now I get a better price, and my daughter works at the processing plant. The money stays here in our community." The factory represents more than just economic opportunity. It embodies a philosophical shift from accepting Africa's role as provider of raw materials to asserting its right to participate in the entire value chain. The building itself symbolizes this transformation with a design that incorporates traditional textile patterns into a modern industrial facility. Inside, the production floor hums with activity. Massive spinning machines transform raw cotton into thread, which is then woven into fabric on state-of-the-art looms. Most significant is what happens in the administrative wing where design, marketing, and brand development take place. Here, young Burkinabe designers create patterns and products that command premium prices in international markets. We're not just making generics and Tisselo. We're not just making generic, the facility's creative director. We're creating distinctly African textiles that celebrate our heritage and appeal to global markets. When our products reach stores in Europe, they don't compete on price alone. They offer something unique, something authentic. The third function of the bank is perhaps its most revolutionary: sovereign currency management. The three member countries, all part of the West African CFA franc zone, have long used a currency controlled by the French treasury, a vestige of colonialism that requires them to keep 50% of their foreign reserves in France. Through the Sahel Investment Bank, these countries are gradually increasing their monetary sovereignty. We're not abandoning the CFA franc overnight, clarifies Dr. Scno. That would create instability. Instead, we're building parallel systems, expanding intra-regional trade in local currencies, creating a digital payment platform that reduces dependency on Western systems, and gradually building our own reserves. The bank has established a dedicated monetary sovereignty division housed in a high-security section of its headquarters. Here, economists and financial strategists develop the technical and policy frameworks for greater currency independence. The work is conducted quietly but purposefully, a revolution in measured steps rather than dramatic gestures. This incremental approach to financial sovereignty has allowed the bank to avoid the violent international backlash that has historically met more abrupt attempts at monetary independence in Africa. When leaders like Burkina Faso's Thomas Sankara or Libya's Muammar Gaddafi proposed gold-backed African currencies outside Western control, they faced severe consequences. The Sahel Investment Bank is achieving similar goals through steady, pragmatic steps rather than dramatic confrontation. The bank's diaspora bonds program has proven particularly successful. Africans living abroad send billions in remittances each year, typically through Western financial services that charge exorbitant fees. The Sahel Investment Bank offers these expatriates the opportunity to invest directly in specific development projects with guaranteed returns. Amadou Deep, a software engineer in Montreal, invested $50,000 in diaspora bonds linked to a solar power project in his hometown in Mali. Before I would send money home to my family, but it was consumption spending. He explains via video call, now I'm building something lasting in my community while also securing my own future. When I retire, I plan to return to a hometown that has developed, partly through my investment. The Diaspora Bonds program also creates an emotional connection that transcends financial considerations. Each bond certificate features artwork by local artists depicting the specific project being funded. Investors receive regular updates with photos and stories from the communities benefiting from their investments. This approach transforms what could be an abstract financial transaction into a tangible connection to home. The bank's digital platform allows diaspora investors to track their investments in real time, seeing exactly how their money is being used and the impact it creates. This transparency stands in stark contrast to traditional aid or remittance flows where the ultimate use of funds is often unclear. Martha Kabor, who manages the Diaspora Bonds program, explains its significance. For decades, our brightest minds have left Africa, taking their talents and eventually their capital with them. This program creates a channel for that human and financial capital to flow back on terms that please, that benefit both the investors and their home communities. The international reaction to the Sahel Investment Bank has been revealing. Western financial institutions initially dismissed it as unsustainable. The Wall Street Journal published an article titled Sahel Bank, a financial mirage in the desert, predicting failure within a year. 18 months later, With the bank's portfolio growing and its first projects showing successful returns, the tone has shifted to cautious recognition. Some Western governments have expressed concern about what they call financial independence without adequate oversight, a thinly veiled suggestion that African nations cannot manage their own finances without Western supervision. Others have taken a more pragmatic approach, with the European Investment Bank proposing partnership arrangements. Offers the Sahel Investment Bank has considered selectively accepting only those that respect its autonomy. The bank's headquarters displays a framed copy of that Wall Street Journal article in its main lobby, a reminder of the skepticism they've had to overcome. Next to it hangs the bank's first annual report, showing a portfolio of 32 successful projects and a return on investment that exceeds most Western development banks. China, Russia, and emerging economies have shown greater interest in collaboration. Seeing the bank as a potential partner rather than a threat, the Sahel Investment Bank has established correspondence relationships with banks in these countries, enabling direct trade financing without Western intermediaries. Another step toward financial sovereignty. Perhaps most significant has been the response from other African nations. Delegations from Ghana, Senegal, Tanzania, and Zambia have visited to study the model. The East African community has begun discussions about establishing a similar regional bank. The African Union has recognized the Sahel Investment Bank as a potential blueprint for the continent's financial future. "We're not claiming to have all the answers," says President Traoré during a tour of bank-funded projects. "We're experimenting, learning, adapting. Some initiatives will succeed brilliantly, others will fail. But the crucial difference is that these are our successes and our failures. We are writing our own economic story." The bank is not without challenges. Resource price volatility creates uncertainty in its funding base. Political stability in the region remains fragile. Technical expertise in specialized financial areas is still being developed. Critics point to these issues as evidence that the model is unsustainable. The bank's risk management team works diligently to address these challenges. They've developed innovative hedging strategies to mitigate resource price fluctuations. A political stability fund provides a financial buffer against political disruptions, and partnerships with African universities are rapidly building local technical capacity. Supporters counter that all new financial institutions face challenges and that Western banks have crashed spectacularly despite centuries of experience and trillions in assets. The difference, they argue, is that Western bank failures are seen as technical problems to be solved, while African initiatives are treated as inevitable failures that prove incapacity. When Wall Street crashed in 2008, did anyone suggest that Americans were inherently incapable of managing banks? Asks Dr. Sen. No, they fixed their regulations and continued. We demand the same right to learn and evolve our model. The bank's headquarters bustles with activity beyond traditional finance. A training institute occupies the top floor, where financial professionals from across Africa attend courses in development banking, resource economics, and sovereign fund management. The goal is to build not just a bank, but a new generation of African financial expertise. The institute's curriculum draws from global best practices, but maintains a distinctly African perspective. Courses on development finance incorporate case studies from successful African projects alongside conventional economic theory. Classes on resource management emphasize long-term stewardship rather than short-term extraction. The program on sovereign wealth management explores how countries like Norway and Singapore have successfully managed their resources, with discussions of how these models might be adapted to African contexts. Fatimata, a 24-year-old graduate from the University of Niamey, is among the trainees. "In my international economics textbooks, Africa was always portrayed as a problem to be solved by others," she says. "Here we learn to see our continent as the solution, not the problem." We study successful models from around the world, but always with the question, how can we adapt this to our unique context? The Training Institute maintains strict standards. Only 15% of applicants are accepted, following a rigorous selection process that evaluates not just academic credentials, but commitment to Africa's development. Graduates receive not just technical knowledge, but a powerful network of like-minded professionals across the continent. The bank's impact extends beyond economics into the realm of psychology. For generations, the assumption that Africa cannot manage its own finances has been internalized by many Africans themselves. The success of the Sahel Investment Bank challenges this colonial mentality. When I was appointed, some people in my own community questioned whether an African-run bank could succeed. Recalls Dr. Sanogo that skepticism is the deepest form of colonization when we doubt ourselves. Every successful project we finance chips away at that doubt. In the villages around Bama, where the bank-financed canal has transformed agricultural output, this psychological shift is visible. Farmers who once saw themselves as helpless against drought now speak confidently about irrigation techniques, crop diversification, and market strategies. Children draw pictures of canals and dams in school, expressing ambitions to become engineers and agricultural scientists. The canal gave us water, says village elder Yumu Kibar, but the knowledge that we built it ourselves with our own bank, our own engineers, our own hands, that gave us something more important. Belief in ourselves. Local schools report increasing interest in mathematics and economics among students. Young people who previously saw few prospects beyond subsistence, farming, or migration now envision careers in finance, engineering, and business. The bank runs outreach programs in schools across the region, explaining basic financial concepts and showing how they relate to community development. This transformation of belief may be the bank's most revolutionary impact. For centuries, the narrative about Africa's resources has been one of curse rather than blessing. The resource curse theory suggests that countries rich in natural resources often develop more slowly due to corruption, conflict, and outside exploitation. The Sahel Investment Bank is attempting to rewrite this story, turning resources into tools for liberation rather than mechanisms of dependency. The bank's logo captures this aspiration: a baobab tree with roots extending into stylized representations of gold, cotton, and uranium, and branches reaching upward to form a shelter. The baobab, an iconic African tree known for storing water in harsh environments, symbolizes resilience and life-sustaining wisdom. Like the baobab, the bank aims to transform raw elements into nourishment and growth. The bank's approach to project selection also differs markedly from traditional development financing. While Western institutions typically prioritize large-scale projects with clear export potential, this Sahel Investment Bank uses a more holistic evaluation framework that considers social impact, environmental sustainability, and contribution to self-sufficiency alongside financial returns. This approach is evident in its financing of grain storage facilities across the region. These relatively small projects don't generate spectacular returns or create export opportunities. What they do accomplish is food security, allowing communities to store surplus harvests for lean periods and reducing dependency on imported food. Food sovereignty is financial sovereignty, explains Khadija, the bank's agricultural finance director. Every dollar not spent on imported rice or wheat is a dollar that strengthens our economic independence. Traditional banks see food storage as charity. We see it as strategic investment in our autonomy. This philosophy extends to the bank's support for renewable energy. The Sahel region has some of the world's highest solar potential, yet has historically depended on imported fossil fuels. Bank has financed 120 community solar projects, ranging from village-scale microgrids to larger installations powering regional hospitals and schools. In the town of Dori, northeastern Burkina Faso, A bank-funded solar array powers not just homes and businesses, but a water pumping system that has transformed local agriculture. Before we spent 40% of our income on diesel for generators and pumps, explains Mayor Hamadoy. KO, now that money stays in our community and we have reliable power and water, the environmental benefits of these projects are substantial. The bank's motivation is primarily economic sovereignty. Every solar panel reduces dependency on imported energy and strengthens local resilience. This practical approach to sustainability avoids the sometimes paternalistic Western environmental discourse while achieving meaningful ecological benefits. The bank's internal governance structure itself represents an innovation. Unlike traditional development banks dominated by their largest shareholders, the Sahel Investment Bank has established a balanced power-sharing arrangement among its 3 founding members. Regardless of their relative economic size, each country has equal representation on the governing board, and decisions require consensus rather than simple majority. This structure has slowed some decisions, but has built deep buy-in across the region. It has also established a model for how relatively small African states can pull sovereignty without domination by larger powers. A persistent challenge in African unity efforts. Local communities also have unprecedented input into financing decisions. Each major project requires not just government approval, but community endorsement through a transparent consultation process. This approach has prevented the elite capture that plagues many development projects and has ensured that investments address real local needs. In the northern Mali town of Gao, community consultations revealed that a proposed manufacturing facility would strain already limited water resources rather than imposing the project. The bank worked with community leaders to redesign it with water recycling systems and a smaller footprint. The resulting facility costs slightly more, but has gained strong local support and avoided potential conflict. Traditional banks would have either canned the project as too difficult or forced it through against local wishes. Notes community leader Aisha Toué. Our bank found a third way because it answers to us, not to distant shareholders. As the bank approaches its 2nd anniversary, it has begun exploring more ambitious initiatives, plans for a regional commodity exchange would allow small farmers to access fair prices for their products without exploitation by middlemen. A technology venture fund aims to finance African startups developing solutions for African challenges. A healthcare infrastructure program focuses on manufacturing essential medicines within the region, rather than importing them at premium prices. These plans face significant challenges. Western financial institutions, seeing potential competition, have sometimes worked to undermine the bank's initiatives. Regulatory hurdles, created during the colonial era, persist in many areas of finance. Technical capacity remains a constraint in specialized fields, yet the momentum continues to build. Each successful project demonstrates that the model is viable. Each new African financial professional trained at the bank strengthens the region's capacity. Each international partnership established on equal terms expands the possibilities. Most importantly, the bank has shifted the conversation about African development. The question is no longer whether Africa can finance its own development, but how quickly and how completely it can establish financial sovereignty. Finance has been one of the last colonies, reflects President Traoré, watching farmers irrigate newly productive fields with water from the Bama Canal. Political independence means little when your resources still flow outward, when your development still requires external permission, when your wealth still enriches others. With this bank, we are completing our liberation as the sun sets over the bank's headquarters. Dr. So reviews applications for the next round of project financing. On her desk sits a small ceramic sculpture of a scale, a gift from local artisans. On one side of the scale is a bag labeled CFA, representing the colonial currency. On the other side is a baobab seedling. The scale tips toward the seedling, a simple but powerful representation of the bank's fundamental purpose. The Sahel Investment Bank is still young, its future uncertain. It operates in a global financial system designed to preserve northern dominance. It serves a region facing severe challenges from climate change, historical underdevelopment, and political fragility. Its success is not guaranteed. What is already clear, however, is that it has changed what Africans believe is possible. A new generation is growing up, seeing their resources translated directly into their development without the familiar pattern of external extraction. They are witnessing African solutions to African challenges. They are imagining a future where financial sovereignty is not a radical concept, but a lived reality. My grandmother told me that when she was young, everyone believed Africa would always be poor, despite its riches, says Musa Arago, a junior analyst at the bank. That made no sense to her, but she accepted it as the natural order. My generation asks, what part of this natural order is actually just a human arrangement that can be changed? That question and the actions it inspires may prove to be the Sahel Investment Bank's most revolutionary contribution to Africa's future. Music.